Exit the vehicle now. This car is flagged as stolen. The order split the morning air with a sharpness that turned heads. Blue and red lights pulsed against the polished black body of a Mercedes idling at the curb. Inside, Judge Elaine Washington sat steady, her pulse calm despite the threat radiating from Officer Daniel Brentwood's hand resting on his holster. She had lived through enough interrogations, trials, and power plays to recognize what was happening. This was not a mistaken process. This was escalation without cause. The city of Philadelphia moved around her, unaware that history was about to pivot. Commuters slowed their cars to watch, a few stepping onto the sidewalk with phones already raised. The federal courthouse, where she was scheduled to preside over a landmark case on police misconduct, stood only 5 blocks away. Its marble columns gleamed in the morning sun, the destination she would not reach on time. The irony was bitter. Yesterday, she had signed an opinion limiting officers' ability to escalate traffic stops. Today, she was living proof of why that ruling was necessary. Brentwood stalked closer, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched, his voice clipped with authority. Behind him, another cruiser rolled up, bringing Officer Kevin Reynolds, younger and less certain, his eyes darting between the woman in the car and his partner's aggression. Elaine lowered her window, her voice even. "Officer, I am reaching into my purse for identification." She moved deliberately, showing every motion. But Brentwood snapped, "Don't move!" The hand on his holster twitched. The warning was loud enough to echo off the shop fronts lining the street. She stopped, her fingers brushing the edge of her wallet. A life spent in service to the Constitution had taught her timing. She waited, measured her breath, then withdrew her ID with slow precision. "I am Judge Elaine Washington of the Federal District Court," she announced. Her voice carried weight, but Brentwood's eyes hardened in disbelief. "Step out of the vehicle. Now!" Elaine opened the door and stepped onto the asphalt. Morning wind tugged at her silk blouse, the gold federal seal catching light as she raised the identification card. Across the street, Thomas Chen, a young man in a gray suit, froze at the sight. Her former law clerk, now an assistant district attorney, recognized her instantly. A subtle nod from Elaine was all it took. He lifted his phone, recording from another angle, his fingers already typing messages that would ripple upward through the system. "Hands on the car," Brentwood barked, ignoring the credential in her hand. Elaine felt the eyes of dozens of strangers pressing down, the weight of silent witnesses. She placed her palms flat against the warm hood. The sting of cold metal pressed against her wrists as handcuffs closed with a metallic snap. Gasps spread through the crowd. Someone shouted, "She showed you ID!" But the officer's voice drowned them out. "Officer Brentwood, badge number 472, Elaine said clearly, her words steady despite the humiliation. "You are violating Code 18, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law." His head jerked. "How do you know my badge number?" "I pay attention." Behind him, Officer Reynolds sifted through the glove compartment of the Mercedes. He pulled out the registration, insurance papers, both clean, both bearing her name. "Brentwood, these look legitimate." "Could be forged," Brentwood muttered, waving him toward the trunk. Reynolds opened it, and his face shifted as though the air itself had grown heavier. Inside hung a garment bag with a federal court seal stitched proudly across black robes. Beside it sat a leather briefcase, the day's docket stacked neatly inside. "You need to see this," Reynolds called, but Brentwood dismissed it with a scowl. "Anyone can buy a costume." The crackle of a radio interrupted, a commanding female voice filtering through. "Unit 47, Lieutenant Foster responding. What is your current situation at Maple and 5th? Moments later, a new cruiser slid to the curb. Lieutenant Diane Foster emerged, her gaze sweeping the scene, an elegant middle-aged woman in cuffs, an open trunk exposing judicial robes, a crowd swelling with indignation, and 2 officers who looked suddenly small in comparison. She stepped forward with a voice both calm and sharp. "Officers, remove those restraints immediately." Brentwood stiffened. "Lieutenant, this vehicle matches—" "Now!" Foster cut in. Her tone left no space for protest. Reynolds moved quickly, his hands fumbling to unlock the cuffs. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," he muttered, eyes dropping as the steel came away from her skin. Elaine rubbed her wrists, then straightened to her full height. The humiliation was real, but dignity remained intact. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice carrying so all could hear, "I will accompany you to the station. On one condition, this incident is recorded in full. Every second." Foster's eyes flickered in acknowledgement. "You have my word, Judge Washington." As Elaine stepped into the back of Foster's cruiser, her gaze lingered on Brentwood. For the first time, his confidence faltered. He stood rigid on the sidewalk, jaw tight, eyes flicking to the cameras capturing every angle of his decision. He did not yet realize it, but in locking cuffs on a federal judge, he had shackled himself to consequences that would stretch far beyond this street. The courthouse clock struck 9:20. The Hernandez case would wait. For now, a different trial had already begun. The ride to the central precinct passed in silence, the hum of the cruiser blending with the low murmur of traffic outside. Judge Elaine Washington sat in the back, wrists tingling where the cuffs had dug into her skin minutes earlier. Lieutenant Foster drove with steady hands, her jaw set in a way that suggested she was replaying every detail already. The city slipped past the windows storefronts, buses, pedestrians, all unaware that in this car, power was shifting. When they arrived, officers in the bullpen stopped mid-sentence as the lieutenant escorted Elaine through the glass doors. Conversations faltered, glances darted. The sight of a handcuffed woman now free and walking tall through their domain, leaving ripples of unease. Foster didn't take her toward the processing desk. Instead, she guided her into an administrative conference room with a wide window overlooking the rows of desks. Chief of Police Luis Martinez entered moments later, a heavy-set man with graying hair and a practiced smile. He carried himself like someone used to putting out fires before they became infernos. Behind him came Officer Reynolds, still pale from the confrontation on the street, and Thomas Chen, already seated with a briefcase open. Documents spread across the table like weapons ready for battle. "Judge Washington," Martinez began, his voice measured, "I want to personally apologize for the inconvenience." Elaine raised an eyebrow. "Chief, this was considerably more than an inconvenience. I was unlawfully detained after your dispatch cleared my vehicle. That is not an error in manners. It is a violation of my rights." The words landed heavily in the small room. Foster placed a tablet on the table, her fingers swiping quickly until she found what she wanted. "Chief," she said, "the timeline is clear. Dispatch logged the stolen car at 8:17 a.m., a black BMW, partial plate ending JKW. At 9:12, dispatch confirmed Judge Washington's Mercedes was not flagged. 2 minutes later, Officer Brentwood called for backup, claiming he had a confirmed match. Chen leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "So either your officer ignored dispatch, or he deliberately lied to escalate the stop." Martinez's smile strained. He glanced toward the bullpen, where through the glass Brentwood could be seen pacing, phone pressed tight to his ear. "I'll need to speak with him directly," Martinez muttered. Elaine's gaze sharpened. "You'll need to do more than that. You'll need to preserve every shred of evidence body camera footage, dash cam, dispatch recordings, personnel files. I will be issuing subpoenas before noon." The air tightened. Chen's phone buzzed, and he answered quietly, turning slightly from the table. When he returned his gaze to Elaine, his words were crisp. "The Chief Justice has convened an emergency session. Your docket for this morning has been reassigned to you in a broader capacity. They want today's incident examined in tandem with the Hernandez case." For a moment, even Martinez looked stunned. "You mean—" "Yes," Chen confirmed. "Judge Washington will preside." The lieutenant's eyes widened, though she quickly composed herself. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his chair, guilt flashing across his features. Martinez rubbed his temples. A man realizing the problem had grown from departmental headache to national scandal. Through the window, more officers were gathering, whispering, their gazes flicking toward the conference room. Phones buzzed across desks. Someone had leaked the story already. The precinct was buzzing with half-truths and speculation. Elaine sat straighter, her tone calm, even deliberate. Chief Martinez, the Hernandez case alleges systemic bias in traffic stops, unlawful detentions after dispatch clears vehicles, and escalation without reasonable suspicion. What happened to me this morning was not merely an echo of those allegations. It was their living embodiment. The chief's composure cracked, his mouth tightening as he searched for words. Foster, still holding the tablet, finally spoke. Judge, I recognized your car passing me 2 blocks before the stop. When I heard Brentwood call in the backup, I knew something wasn't right. That's why I responded myself. She hesitated before continuing. This isn't the first time I've had concerns about his methods. Elaine turned her gaze on her. Documented concerns? 7 complaints, Foster admitted softly. All minority drivers. All dismissed for lack of evidence. Silence expanded, thick as smoke. Chen closed his briefcase with a decisive snap. The time for quiet warnings is over. Judge, the counsel is waiting. We need to get you to the courthouse. Elaine rose, smoothing her blouse, her dignity undiminished. She turned once more to Martinez. Chief, your department had a chance to contain this quietly. Now, you will face it publicly. Outside, Brentwood's voice could be heard rising as he argued with someone over the phone. His shadow passed across the frosted glass of the conference room door, pacing, restless, cornered. Lieutenant Foster retrieved the keys to Elaine's Mercedes, holding them out respectfully. Your vehicle has been cleared and secured. Judge, you can drive it yourself to the courthouse. Elaine accepted them, her eyes never leaving Brentwood's silhouette. For the first time since the stop, a hint of fear flickered across his movements. The courthouse clock was ticking toward 10. The trial she was meant to preside over had grown into something larger. As she stepped into the hallway, surrounded by silence heavy with consequence, Judge Elaine Washington knew the next chapter would not be about one officer, one department, or one case. It would be about the system itself. By the time Judge Elaine Washington returned to the courthouse, the plaza outside was swarming. News vans parked at angles, satellite dishes blooming like metal flowers on their roofs. Reporters jostled for space, cameras aimed at the marble steps. Word had spread faster than traffic. A federal judge handcuffed on the street was the kind of story that didn't wait for an official press release. Elaine avoided the gauntlet of microphones by slipping through the judicial entrance. Thomas Chen matched her stride, carrying a heavy briefcase, his phone buzzing without pause. Every major outlet has it, he murmured. Local feeds, national networks, even overseas wire services. They all want a statement. Not yet, Elaine said simply. Her tone was the same as it had been on the street, calm, measured, as if the entire morning had been part of a larger argument she was still building. In the robing room, she stood before the mirror. The black robes Brentwood had dismissed as a costume now hung over her shoulders with solemn weight. She adjusted the collar, brushed invisible lint from the sleeves. A deep breath steadied her. When she emerged into the courtroom, the air shifted instantly. All rise, the bailiff's voice thundered. The packed chamber stood. Rows of officers in uniform filled the gallery. Attorneys lined the benches, notebooks ready. At the front, Chief Martinez sat with department counsel. Behind him, Officer Brentwood and Officer Reynolds occupied seats beside union representatives. Lieutenant Foster sat separately, posture straight, her gaze fixed forward. You may be seated, Elaine said, her voice carrying effortlessly. She looked out over the crowd, then leaned slightly forward on the bench. This court convenes today to address Hernandez v. Metropolitan Police Department as well as the events of this morning in which this judge was directly involved. Federal procedure permits a judge to hear cases concerning their own treatment when the matter involves the integrity of the judicial process itself. Let there be no misunderstanding. The law does not bend for convenience. Murmurs rippled. Elaine gave a small nod to Chen, who stepped to the side table and connected his laptop to the courtroom screens. The first image flickered into view. Dash cam footage from Brentwood's cruiser. Exhibit 1, she announced. Note the timestamp. The video played at 9:12 a.m. Dispatch informed Officer Brentwood that her vehicle did not match the stolen BMW. 17 seconds later, his voice came through. Confirmed stolen vehicle. Requesting backup. AIM. The contradiction rang through the chamber like a siren. The police department's counsel shifted uncomfortably. Martinez's jaw tightened. Brentwood sat rigid, eyes fixed forward, but his knuckles whitened as he clenched his fists. Exhibit 2, Elaine continued. The screen shifted to shaky cell phone videos from bystanders. Multiple angles showed her compliance, her judicial ID in hand, and Brentwood dismissing it as she was cuffed against her own car. Gasps spread through the gallery. Exhibit 3, dispatch recordings. The audio filled the room. Unit 47, plate RHT registered to Judge Elaine Washington, vehicle not flagged. Seconds later, Brentwood's reply, confirmed stolen, suspect detained. The words hung like lead in the silence that followed. Even the union representative leaned closer to whisper sharply in Brentwood's ear. Elaine's gaze swept the room. Exhibit 4, Officer Brentwood's personnel file. Chen pulled up the record. 12 civilian complaints in 3 years, all from minority drivers, all dismissed. Elaine tapped her gavel lightly. Cross-reference with dispatch records. 9 of these incidents show identical patterns. Vehicles cleared. Detentions continued regardless. The pressure in the chamber built like a storm. Brentwood shifted at last, his face flushed, his breathing uneven, but Elaine wasn't finished. Exhibit 5. Security footage filled the screens. Brentwood in plain clothes, 2 weeks earlier, outside the courthouse. He followed her to her car, lifted his phone, and photographed her license plate. This officer was not on duty that day, Elaine said. Her tone was ice. No legitimate assignment placed him at this courthouse. Martinez's attorney rose, half-heartedly objecting, but Elaine silenced him with a raised hand. Exhibit 6, Officer Brentwood's phone records, subpoenaed this morning. The list appeared. Multiple calls between Brentwood and Roger Simmons, the disgraced former officer found liable for brutality in a case over which Elaine had presided. Calls before and after the verdict. Calls again yesterday, on the eve of the Hernandez hearing. The gallery erupted with whispers. Brentwood's union rep pulled at his sleeve, trying to steady him, but his eyes darted, his mask cracking. Elaine turned to Foster. Lieutenant, based on your professional judgment, were Officer Brentwood's actions consistent with department policy? Foster rose, her voice clear. No, Your Honor. His actions violated both departmental protocol and constitutional protections against unlawful detention. Elaine gave a slow nod. Thank you, Lieutenant. Your testimony is noted. Her gaze returned to the courtroom at large. This morning's events are not isolated. They are the living evidence of what the Hernandez plaintiffs allege, that minority drivers are disproportionately stopped, detained, and humiliated, even after dispatch clearance, even when identification is presented, even when no reasonable suspicion exists. The evidence presented here is not circumstantial. It is conclusive. Chief Martinez leaned forward, lips parting to object, but Elaine raised her gavel. This court finds sufficient grounds to expand Hernandez v. Metropolitan Police Department into a comprehensive, department-wide review under federal oversight. The Department of Justice will appoint special monitors for a period of no less than 3 years. Traffic stop data will be independently analyzed for systemic violations. Gasps. scribbling pens. The courtroom absorbed the weight of her words like a building weathering a quake. As for the constitutional violations committed against this court personally, Elaine continued, I am recusing myself. That matter will be referred to Judge Williams in the Western District. Her voice sharpened. Officer Brentwood is suspended immediately, pending termination proceedings. Officer Reynolds is placed on administrative leave while his role is further investigated. She lifted her gavel high, then brought it down with a crack that echoed off marble. Court is adjourned. And the chamber erupted. Lawyers shouted. Reporters bolted for the doors. Cameras flashed. Elaine rose, her robes flowing, her face calm as ever. But inside, she felt the tectonic shift. Justice had been pried open, and nothing would close it again. Outside, the news vans were already broadcasting. Inside, every officer and attorney in the chamber knew they had just witnessed more than a case. They had seen a system forced to look itself in the mirror. 6 months had passed since the day Judge Elaine Washington stood in her own courtroom and expanded a single lawsuit into a department-wide reckoning. The city had not forgotten. Neither had the department. The Metropolitan Police Precinct looked different now. Posters lined the walls, reminders of constitutional rights, intervention protocols, accountability hotlines. The old slogans about strength through force had been replaced with authority through integrity. Officers moved through the halls with a different weight in their steps, as if someone were always watching, and in truth, someone always was. Federal monitors sat in offices upstairs, reviewing data, observing shifts, auditing reports. At the center of this fragile transformation was Captain Diane Foster, promoted in the aftermath of the scandal. She walked the corridors with a new insignia on her uniform, the silver gleam of rank earned not through silence, but through the courage to speak. Officers both respected and resented her, but they could not ignore her. Officer Kevin Reynolds had chosen a different path. His testimony during the federal review hearings had been damning, admitting he failed to intervene, confessing the pattern of Brentwood's heightened scrutiny toward minority drivers. Many expected his career to end. Instead, he became a reluctant symbol of reform. Now he worked in the accountability division under Foster's command, leading workshops on peer intervention and ethical policing. In classrooms, he spoke with the awkward honesty of someone who had seen the cost of silence firsthand. The city outside had noticed the shift. Complaints against the department had dropped nearly 50%. Unlawful detentions were down by more than 60%. Surveys showed trust inching upward in neighborhoods long alienated from law enforcement. The oversight was working, not perfectly, not painlessly, but undeniably. And yet, beneath the statistics, tension simmered. A faction of officers still grumbled in locker rooms, muttering about political witch hunts and soft policing. They avoided eye contact when reforms were discussed, clinging to the old ways, but they no longer controlled the narrative. Meanwhile, Daniel Brentwood faced his own reckoning. The courtroom where he once strutted in uniform now awaited him as a defendant. His trial for civil rights violations had begun. Federal prosecutors armed with body cam footage, dispatch logs, and phone records tying him to disgraced former officer Roger Simmons. The arrogance that once fueled his commands on the street had thinned into a brittle defiance. He arrived each morning flanked by his union representative, jaw clenched, eyes darting toward the gallery where reporters sat in neat rows. Judge Elaine Washington watched it all unfold from the bench, though she had recused herself from Brentwood's criminal proceedings. Another federal judge presided, but Washington remained a constant presence in the oversight hearings, guiding the reform process. To her, Brentwood's trial was not just about one officer, it was the visible tip of a deeper structure, finally forced into daylight. One morning, Reynolds was called to testify against his former partner. The courtroom held its breath as he walked to the witness stand. He adjusted the microphone, hands trembling, then lifted his gaze toward the judge. "Yes," he said, voice cracking at first but gaining strength. "I watched Officer Brentwood detain Judge Washington after dispatch had cleared her vehicle. I watched him ignore her identification. I watched him escalate when there was no threat, and I didn't stop him. That was my failure, but I will not lie about it now. The silence that followed carried more weight than any closing argument. Brentwood shifted in his chair, his eyes narrowing, but the damage was done. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered, some calling for deeper reform, others shouting Brentwood's name in misplaced loyalty. Inside, the wheels of justice turned with deliberate force. For Washington, these months had been a test of patience. Each reform proposal required endless meetings, pushback from the union, skepticism from politicians. Progress was never swift, never simple. Yet every time she stood in front of new recruits at the police academy, playing the dash cam footage of her own detention, she felt the work was worth it. She would tell the cadets, authority without accountability is not strength, it is tyranny. Your badge gives you power, but the Constitution defines its limits. Respect those limits, and the public will respect you. Some cadets looked uncomfortable. Others leaned forward, nodding, writing notes as if the words might save them in moments yet to come. It was in those rooms, quiet, unglamorous, away from the cameras, that the real change was taking root. As the Brentwood trial neared its end, Washington returned to her chambers one evening and paused at the window. The courthouse plaza was quieter now, the frenzy of 6 months ago replaced by a steadier rhythm. Yet she knew this was only the beginning. The system was vast, the temptations of unchecked authority persistent, but for the first time in years, she felt something close to cautious hope. The academy auditorium buzzed with low chatter as cadets in crisp uniforms filled the rows. Manuals sat open on their laps, the title stamped in bold across each cover: Constitutional Policing, Rights, Responsibilities, and Reform. 6 months earlier, this would have been unthinkable. Now, it was required reading. At the front of the room stood Judge Elaine Washington, dressed not in robes but in a tailored navy suit. A projector glowed behind her, displaying the familiar dash cam footage, the grainy clip of her own traffic stop. The room stilled as Brentwood's voice barked through the speakers. "Exit the vehicle now. This car is flagged as stolen." Elaine let the footage run until the moment the handcuffs snapped around her wrists. Then she paused the video. The frozen image of her bent against her own car lingered on the screen. "Your badge grants you authority," she said, her voice calm yet resonant. "But authority without accountability becomes tyranny. The Constitution doesn't exist to make your jobs harder. It exists to ensure that when you exercise power, it is legitimate, lawful, and just." In the back of the hall, Captain Diane Foster entered, the new insignia on her uniform catching the light. She moved quietly to the stage, standing beside the judge with a presence that carried both humility and strength. "6 months ago," Elaine continued, "I had a choice. I could seek personal vindication, or I could pursue systemic reform. I chose reform. Because justice is not about punishing one man. It is about transforming institutions so that abuses cannot repeat." She gestured toward Foster. "Captain Foster is living proof of what courage inside a system can accomplish. She chose the Constitution over silence, and that choice changed her department." The captain stepped forward, her eyes scanning the young faces before her. "Every day you will face decisions like mine," she said. "Moments when protecting a colleague will mean betraying your oath. In those moments, remember this: your loyalty is to the law, not to each other's mistakes." The cadets shifted in their seats, some nodding gravely, others scribbling notes with determined focus. The presentation continued, now showing metrics from the department under federal oversight. Complaints down 47%, unlawful detentions reduced by 62, community trust climbing steadily. Each number flickered across the screen, evidence that reform was not theory, it was measurable, real, undeniable. Then came the slide none of them could ignore: Brentwood's termination notice, alongside his federal indictment for civil rights violations. His name was no longer synonymous with authority, but with consequence. Next to it, a contrasting Slide Officer Reynolds cooperation agreement. His new role in training programs on ethical policing. Two paths, two outcomes, both carved from the same morning's mistake. The strength of our justice system, Elaine told them, is not its perfection, it is its capacity for correction. When we admit failure, we create the opportunity for change. The cadets erupted in applause as she concluded. Some clapped tentatively, others with fervor, but all seemed to understand that this was not just another lecture, it was a blueprint. Outside, news crews waited for interviews, eager to frame the department as a national model for reform. Inside, however, the transformation was quieter cadets whispering to each other, processing the weight of the lesson they had just witnessed. Later that week, Judge Washington sat once again on the bench of her courtroom. The chamber looked the same as it always had, wood paneling polished, flags standing proud, but something was different. The officers who stood guard at the doors carried themselves taller, their training newly sharpened. Attorneys in the gallery looked at her with the respect due not just to her title, but to the ordeal she had endured and turned into a catalyst. She thought briefly of Brentwood, now awaiting trial in a federal cell, and of Simmons, whose calls had tied them together in conspiracy. Their downfall was not vengeance. It was a reaffirmation that no badge, no position, no rank placed anyone above the law. She thought also of Reynolds, finding a second chance not through denial, but through confession, and of Foster, who had transformed from cautious lieutenant into a captain shaping an entire culture. The bailiff called the court to order. Elaine straightened her robes, the same robes once dismissed as a costume, in the trunk of her car. She tapped her gavel lightly. "This court is now in session," she declared. The work continued, one case at a time, one reform at a time. Justice demanded vigilance, courage, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. And as the morning sunlight poured through the high courthouse windows, catching the scales of justice etched into the wall, Judge Elaine Washington knew the lesson would outlast her. The system had scars now, but also, finally, a path forward. If this story of accountability and reform spoke to you, don't just let it pass. Subscribe to Beat Stories for more powerful narratives where truth collides with power and change becomes inevitable. Like this video, share it with someone who still believes in justice, and ring the notification bell because the next story might be yours.